Hello, everybody. Happy Mother's Day, and welcome to our 29th Help Save Our World online speakers meeting. Change your conversation, change your world. The topic for today will be thought. My name is Dennis, the teacher of this guided quest for the truth. Remember, these meetings are based on my book titled Beyond the Age of Ignorance, which I wrote while I was on my personal quest for the truth. Now, a brief update of where we are up to on our guided quest for the truth. This is your journey to enlightenment. I use colors for each of the chapters in my book, Beyond the Age of Ignorance. The colors of the visible light spectrum combined create white light, where we see everything the best. This is the metaphor I use for enlightenment. So as we go through these different colors, we're heading more and more to that state of seeing and understanding and responsibility and wisdom. So that is the journey to enlightenment. So first of all, we began with the unseen, which is infrared light. We don't see infrared light with our eyes. We can use special apparatus to actually see infrared light, but ultimately we don't see it naturally. It's not within our visual spectrum. So firstly, we intuitively knew there was something wrong, but we were unclear what it was. So we go into looking at it in red light, where we went through the problems of the world. And then, having gone through the problems of the world, we realize that humans are responsible for most of the problems in our world today. Our first reaction at this point was to point fingers at others. Then we soon realized that was not okay, because we could see that we were part of the problem. Orange, we began looking at ourselves, where we went through what we could change about ourselves and our way of life to heal ourselves and to heal or make a difference in our world. Somewhere on that part of the journey, we realized that our thoughts initiate our choices, and our choices result in our behaviors. Our behaviors combined result in our way of life, which can be perceived as our personality. And all of that collective behavior of the people within a society results in the society and the civilizations and the world they manifest around them, which can be considered to be human nature, which I contend not to be true, because we all have the ability to change our thoughts and behaviors. Then we recalled that our way of life in the societal structure is killing our natural world and us in the process. So we realized changing the way we think is really important. So now we're on to the yellow section. In this section of our quest, it's about thought, where we question what we think and what we believe, and most importantly, what influences and controls our thoughts, which controls our choices and therefore controls our way of life. Now, before we begin, would you like to introduce yourself, Kurt?
I can do that. Yeah. So my name is Kurt. I'm residing in South Florida. I am on a perpetual quest for being on my journey and finding out meaning in it, and being willing to get off of that meaning and find a new meaning if that's what comes up.
Awesome, good. Brendan?
Yes, my name is Brendan. I'm 25. I reside in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, and I am on this journey in order to help save the world and also to create eco-villages.
Cool. Thanks so much, Brendan. Let's start with the big question. What is thought? Let me just create a very simplistic and brief history of thought. Well, it all begins with basic communication. It began with simple body language, like, danger, and then making sounds, of course, grunts and moans, and which eventually developed into complex languages. Usually unique languages developed, which were specific to the isolated tribes in different regions. Then humans needed to pass that information on, which resulted in pictorial communication, as we see in cave paintings of animals and whatever in ancient caves. This developed into the combination of pictures and symbolic imagery like we see in hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt. I think then of the development of symbols in ancient Greece and around the world, in China and Roman numerals, and I think of all of the others that developed into our modern languages and mathematical symbols. Sounds became pictures, pictures became symbols, symbols combined became words, words combined became sentences, sentences combined became paragraphs and chapters and books. This means of institutionalizing information, either engraved on rocks or written on papyrus or paper or scrolls or in books, was a means of passing on the knowledge of the past to the future and to other people, which others who knew the language could read, thus formed our written communication. People raised to use this language began to think in languages. As language-speaking apes, our conscious thoughts are communicated within our minds with language and mental processes we call thoughts. It's really important to realize that conscious experiences are far more complex, with much more information than we simplify down into with language, thinking, speaking, and listening. The information of our life's experiences, our insights, our intuition, and our dreams are full video, sensory experiences which cannot be comprehensively communicated via simple languages. However, we must do our best to communicate clearly. Enunciation is really important. Being very careful of the words we use. Many words carry a huge amount of historical baggage, so choose your words well. Then it's really important to consider your audience. The clarity of your communication, the words you use, and the totalities of your audience's knowledge and experiences is really important to know so that you can communicate effectively with them. Not everything you say to them or what you intended them to hear will be heard in that way by them because of who they are. As you might realize, thought could include every thought ever thought, and that would be impossible to even contemplate. And then all of the possibilities of thoughts that were never thought and still have to be thought and could possibly be thought. However, there are some fundamental causal thoughts. Our thought predispositions, those thoughts that we're predisposed to, at the foundations of most of our subsequent thoughts. It's like the building blocks on which everything stands. Now, if we knew what they were and where they come from and how they could be used to control our lives, then we will have something to work with. So what are those fundamental thoughts, values and beliefs, ethics, that drive us to think the thoughts we think and do the things we do, that profoundly affect our lives and the world we manifest around us? The skill or technique used to find them is to search through the beginnings of every belief system. You do this to uncover and analyze these thoughts. Often these are the first books or the first chapters of a belief system, or University 101 courses, or reading encyclopedias. Other fundamental thoughts you'll find spread out in the texts. For them, you'll need to search harder to uncover and understand the basic premises of those different theories within a belief system. As in science, there are a multitude of different theories, and you have to go through and look at each theory, always searching for the bias or the meaning or the essential reasons why they made the choices they made and why they come to the conclusions they come to. So it's really important to realize that these fundamental thoughts, ethics, and values and beliefs are at the foundations of every belief system or institution. As I search and discover new concepts, I write them down. Ideally, I create mind maps to simplify and clarify and then memorize the ideas. It's also easier to see the big picture when you read the whole book or have this whole mind map. Once you have the foundations or pillars of thought on which the institutions and society stand, you will understand why we are in the trouble we are in and be very clear on what we need to change. You with us, Kurt? Brendan?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, I'm with you.
Cool. Everyone happy with where I am at? You with me?
Yep.
Good, good.
Yeah, keep going because I'm with you and I like where you're heading.
Good, good, good.
Back to the pillars of thought.
All right, there we go. Some important concepts to understand. We all know that experience, or what we are told is experience, leads to pattern recognition. Like if we see it, if we sense like noise in the forest and we look in the direction of the noise and we see the shape or the pattern of the tiger. And these experiences affect immediately how we feel, which are followed by emotions rising up within us, which are followed by conditioned behaviors or thoughts, judgments, decisions, and choices, which we act upon. Now, in that particular instance with the tiger, it's what we call instinct. We have this pattern of behavior and we just play it out. It might be run for your life, it might be stare at the tiger and maintain eye contact, or whatever it is that you've been programmed to believe is the solution to that situation. That's what you'll instantaneously play out. But for many, many others, we will go through this process, which is the feelings, the emotions, which are followed by the conditioned behaviors or thoughts, judgments, decisions, and choices, which then we act out, which manifests our world around us. It's in the doing that you bring it into our physical world as a physical act. You know, while it's in your mind, it's here in this physical reality, and it's part of your internal physical expression or happening in your brain, but it hasn't happened to the world. The moment you move, you are now bringing a physical reaction or a change into our environment. And then, of course, if that physical behavior alters the surroundings, you have manifested it into the physical world, like building a brick house to save or protect you. You've now taken your thought and you've converted it into a physical dwelling, a protection, but it's now your thoughts have become reality. Many of those experiences, which are usually fear-based, are enacted and reinforced by governments, propaganda, media, and war machines to further their agenda. They are perpetuated and promoted by governments, leaders, media, books, histories of the conquerors, education systems, and worst of all, perpetuated by the institutionalization of thought and behavior. Institutionalization making it last for many generations into the future. Now, for a very simplistic and basic look at the basic process of institutionalization. First, you have a leader with an idea. He gathers people or friends around, and they meet informally, maybe at home, all sitting around the coffee table, drinking coffee or whatever, and they talk about and they develop the ideas. They then begin to meet more regularly, like every Sunday. The group grows and everyone begins to contribute towards the system. They eventually acquire a meeting space, like a hall, where they have lots of chairs and they can invite more people, where the meetings start to become more formal. This eventually results in many halls, where many people meet regularly to learn the teachings. The first generation teaches the next generation by taking their children to the meetings. This becomes a habit, a way of life, while the followers are contributing their personal time, energy, and money to the system, so it grows. The system has requirements or behaviors and ways of showing personal commitment and loyalty to the system. Now, as you know, in the growth of gangs, in prisons, they have, you've got to beat this person up or go and stab this person in the butt or go and kill this person. They have certain requirements for the gang to show the loyalty to the gang. And that was done with sacrifices in the Bible in the beginning, and sacrifices of supposedly someone's son, and then sacrifice of animals, and then paying half a shekel or paying something in towards the growth and the power of the system by each individual participant within the system. So while the followers are contributing their personal time, energy, and money to the system, so it grows, the system has requirements of behaviors and ways to show the commitment and loyalty, and then things like symbols are developed, and flags, and songs, and anthems, all ways of identifying with the growing institution. Eventually, the institution has a life of its own, based on the founding values and beliefs of the original teachings. In this way, the paradigm is passed on from generation to generation, like a superhuman. No matter whether it is good or bad, it just marches on. Institutions create an unchanging societal loop, like being stuck in your unconscious mind and behavior. You just repeat the same stuff over and over again. Like struggling to walk through a deep, muddy swamp. Change is slow and often impossible to achieve, no matter how hard you try. Once a power-based system, institution, is established on fundamental values and beliefs, the only way to change it is when people stop supporting it. This usually happens when people try to change those fundamental values and beliefs. The institution can collapse overnight if they manage to do that. The total change of the values and beliefs and way of life is called a paradigm shift. Institutionalized thought and behavior controlling systems are designed to control our fundamental thoughts, ethics, and values and beliefs of our civilizations, empires, and our world's people. It's important to know what are the institutions that control our way of thinking and how we live our lives. If these institutions or pyramids of power stand on pillars of fundamental thoughts and values and beliefs, knowing what those fundamental thoughts are and the effects they have on our lives is extremely important. Then ultimately to know what are the reasons for that thought and behavior control system. Why does this institution exist? What are they trying to achieve? So important. So is it not obvious that revisiting those thoughts which control our behavior is really important to see what is wrong with them? And then, even more important, is to look for alternatives to replace them, to create maybe a love-based institution of the future. Is everyone with me still? Kurt?
Yeah, still here.
I am. Yep.
Good. Do you mind if I continue, or do you want to talk about it or question anything?
Well, good question. I don't know how far along we are. We're probably about close to 20 minutes, I guess. And so there's been a lot of major buckets of information that have come across through the process of your thought journey. So I don't have the questions now. I've been writing some notes. So why don't you finish, and then we'll see if we can go back and deconstruct it in a way that we can all discuss. You good with that, Brendan, too?
That sounds good.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, guys.
So I'm good, Dennis. Okay.
Good. It's a bit of a thought journey, as you say. Now, I just want to bring us back to just remember our developing fundamental principles. Your thoughts matter. Your choices based on those thoughts matter. Your behaviors based on those choices, based on those thoughts, really matter. Thought precedes choices, which precedes behavior. Nothing influences our behaviors more than our thoughts and our choices. However, we're not fully conscious of every thought, choice, and behavior we have, because most of it is hidden from our conscious choices. So let's revisit how our thought conditioning influences our everyday lives and our world. We now know that there are many things that influence our behavior, which affects our way of life and our world around us, from what we eat to what we drink, and whatever we assimilate into our beings, whether it be mushrooms or weed or psychedelics of any kind, all sorts of things, even just the water we drink, influences how we behave. There's so many foods that have hormones and all sorts of things. So much can influence our thought, but nothing affects our behavior more than our practiced thoughts, practiced choices and actions and behaviors, which became our subconscious program. Below our consciousness, we have this thing called subconsciousness. And say, for example, we wake up in the morning, we go through the whole process of getting out of bed and brushing our teeth and eating our breakfast and driving our cars to work. And we get to work and we suddenly become conscious of the fact that we're at work, and we look around and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how I got here. Well, those thoughts are subconscious. They're just beneath your consciousness, but you are making decisions. I mean, do you go right or left at this intersection? It's a choice. And you're making these choices, but you aren't consciously aware of them. Then there are the unconscious, lower than that. It's just the things that you're totally unconscious about. It's like what keeps your heart beating, and why do you make the choices to constantly breathe? It's all of that fundamental biological processes that are choices that are being made. So the moment you breathe out, you've stopped breathing, and now you have to breathe in. It's a choice. Basically, those choices are being made all the time as well. But those expand to many, many other choices, which we are pretty much unconscious of. So, let's just say, but nothing affects our behavior more than our practiced thoughts, choices, and actions and behaviors, which become our subconscious and unconscious program choices, which drive our behavior, through which we manifest our world around us. We now know that plus minus 90% of our everyday choices are not conscious choices, but subconscious and unconscious thought programs. So what are those initial thoughts and the values and beliefs we chose to believe or just accepted to be the basis of our lives, which most of us unquestioningly live by? I took this section from my book, Beyond the Age of Ignorance. So I'm just going to read this to you. It's fascinating to think how people think. I cannot believe people still think like this. I have crossed paths with many people who have been indoctrinated into extreme ignorance and listen in silent horror to what comes out of their mouths, thinking to myself, I cannot comprehend that people still think this way. Recently, in conversations with an acquaintance, he made these statements. I prefer not to think about the big picture or macroeconomics. I believe, prefaced most of his statements, beliefs, or ideologies. I love this country. As humans, we cannot know the truth. Humans are born evil. I believe in God. There are too many people on this earth to live spread out on the land. It is too late to change. Unless something major happens, we will not change. Human nature is the cause of what's happening in our world. Everything that humans do is natural because they are part of nature. Maybe this is the way it is meant to be. The planet will survive without us. There are all sorts of life forms in the oceans that we have not even discovered yet, that will someday populate the world. Only humans have consciousness. Black people are not as enlightened or evolved as white people. The Chinese and the Indians in India are overpopulating, polluting, and destroying our planet. Muslims are suicide bombers so they can join their many virgins in the afterlife. Ha ha, I'm a racist. I hate beggars. Why don't they get a job or do something? There are no homeless people and beggars in Palm Beach. Black people who have lots of children do that so that they can live off the backs of the hard-working middle class. They are lazy. They need to get a job. They must pull themselves up with their bootstraps. I'm all right, and bzzzt, you jack. I have a great house, lots of money, great car, a wife and 4 children. So why do I have to worry? This divisive, racist, finger-pointing, judgmental, and irresponsible thought and language goes on and on. To my acquaintance and to those who think like him, I say, we can blindly believe the lies and the indoctrination that we were taught by our parents and those in power who divide and rule us, or we can choose to think and question everything. The truth is attainable by going on a quest to find those answers. Then, with the truth, knowledge, and wisdom, we can begin to transform our world. When we know the truth, we need to teach it to others and to our children. Then we can institutionalize that truth to ensure its longevity. By doing so, we naturally solve the problems of the world and manifest a happy, healthy, and sustainable, abundant world, which we all deserve to live in. To those who believe in propaganda such as we have evolved into our Western way of life and thus cannot go back, I say this is far from the truth. We have actually devolved in relation to our natural evolution. We are becoming more and more unhealthy as a race with the destruction of nature, death, and the extinction of living systems, and many modern diseases. We are dying instead of thriving and evolving as beings in the flow of life should do. One night, I was talking to an older patriotic fisherman who asked me if I liked living in America. I said, well, there are certain aspects I can appreciate and others I abhor. What do you like? He asked. I replied, I like the beauty of nature, the national parks, the oceans, the sea life. What don't you like? He asked. I don't like the perpetual wars, I replied. Well, somebody has to take responsibility and deal with those extremist Muslims, he said, as he continued on and on, repeating the media and government-created hate speech. I cannot comprehend that although he had fought in the Vietnam War massacres, he still had no idea what's going on in our world. He had swallowed the propaganda hook, line, and sinker. He honestly believed that being a Vietnam vet made him a good guy. He had no idea of what went on in that war. Sometimes you can be so close to the coalface that you cannot see what you're doing to the world and to the people of the world and to nature all around you. I now go on to another concept, which is success and the American dream. Are you with me, Kurt?
Hello, Lorna.
I'm still here.
And are you still happy?
That has nothing to do with anything you're doing, but yeah, I am.
Okay. Hello, Lorna. How are you? All right, I'm just going to continue. Success and the American dream. Most people perceive success in our society as having a good education, lots of money, and things. The system makes this American dream unattainable by keeping the majority of us uninformed of the truth and on the edge of survival. The scheme is that it requires more and more from us, making that dream impossible to achieve for most of us. And yet we chase it like donkeys chasing carrots on the ends of sticks. It's promised success, profits, interest, fines, licenses, insurance, healthcare, education, debts, and taxes all hold us mesmerized and in bondage. We are prisoners of our own minds, prisoners of the system, and its way of life. We are more and more burdened because of monopolization, inflation, increased costs, earning less, while constantly striving harder and harder to get ahead. This only happens because we believe the lies and ignore the truth. Freedom is not possible if we're constantly striving like gerbils on a treadmill. We have become waged slaves to business and corporations owned by the ruling classes and ultimately by the bankers and the owners of the world. We can never find true freedom within this controlling, limiting, and strangling pyramid scheme. Many people continue to perpetuate the old paradigm in fear of upsetting their relatives. Many go to church just to please their parents. Some say, "What worked for my parents works for me." Parents have a lot of power and control over their children, which they unwittingly use to force them to perpetuate the paradigm, thus enforcing the state of ignorance and the damage we're doing to our world. Having an education, a degree, a master's, or even a doctorate does not necessarily mean you have escaped ignorance. In most cases, it has trapped you in specialization. And to me, specialization is ignoring everything else and becoming so focused that you are, in actual fact, becoming more ignorant as you go. Having spent that much of your life getting the education, the doctorate, in psychology or whatever it is, science, becoming a physicist, means that when you find the truth, you are less likely to throw it all away to live by that truth, keeping yourself stuck in fear, ignorance, and the death-based paradigm. I think we're going on to another section here, so I'm just going to stop at this point. I think we've done enough for today. And of course, this area of thought is a really big section, so it's going to take quite a few weeks. So let's just open it up to the floor. Kurt, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'll go back in. So I guess I came into this with the segment on consciousness, right? So obviously thought, I don't know which includes which. Does thought include consciousness or consciousness include thought? Either way, it's a fairly big topic. And yeah, I think you've introduced a lot of offshoots from that main topic of consciousness. So I'll just speak to those, and you mentioned a number of them along the way. Certainly the idea of a paradigm as being what consciousness is, even to our discussion of what is consciousness. It's, what's our paradigm, what's our understanding, what's our thoughts and beliefs about what is consciousness. And so I came up with a couple of words similar to that. I call it context. But I think paradigm is just as good a word. It's what do we hold within that word? This goes back to your original laying out of words and communication. What do we hold as contents within the context of that word, paradigm or context or consciousness or whatever? So we're going through that process, as you mentioned, of how can we distill it down to what were our original learnings, I guess, or impressions, if we go from the sensory level, on what stimulated a sensory input in order for us to react or respond to it, in order for us to then consider what just happened and what should I do about it. And if I don't have to do anything about it, then what do I think about it? What does it mean? And oftentimes we don't go through that process as we're experiencing it. Where we're kind of happy either to get away from the tiger or get out of the conversation that we don't like that we're hearing, or whatever it might have been. So I think you're right on how all of these impressions end up building us into the consciousness that we have. And again, I use that term loosely here. It's I think we have multiple consciousnesses. Um, at least that's my take on building up until today. Certainly there's the conscious consciousness, right? The one that we have access to when we're awake and we can call on to go through logically. You mentioned the subconscious as well, and definitely we have a lot of that operating us, if not most of us. I think I've read that, I don't know, 90 some odd percent of our choices are made unconsciously. So we don't even pay attention to what just drove us. Why did I just say that? Why did I just think that? And then the unconscious as well. And I go along with Carl Jung when he had labeled the collective unconsciousness, which is that all-knowingness that we can tap into, whether it's up or down, or, you know, I don't know that there has to be a direction to it, but so that there are these levels of consciousness that we operate with, and most of the time they're all running. We're just not aware of it, which kind of brought me to some of our bodily functions. And as you know, some of them are voluntary, like I can make this happen, and some of them are involuntary, like breathing or the pumping of our heart, various other activities that go on, digestion. You know, we don't sit here and just think about which chemical do I need to put in to digest a particular piece of food. It just happens. So similar to our consciousness and our thinking is our body operates in very similar ways, which is why having knowledge of your body and your body processes, and then seeing how they interact, and then seeing how they also inform our feelings, our thoughts, our energy level, our ability to think clearly, etc. So that idea of consciousness and how we can access it just brings up a lot of different perspectives on how we operate in life. And you touched on very many of them, and you start to go actually into some other ways of abstracting. Where do we apply our consciousness and unconsciousness? And, you know, I started thinking about you know, like altered states, and I think you mentioned that a few minutes ago with psychedelics and things, and how we can then, you know, distort the consciousness or clarify it depending on how you look at what the chemicals and medicines can do. So, you know, we can get into altered states, which then brings us to a whole different consciousness. And you know, there's the talk of the 3D world and the 5D world, and how people, you know, where are you living in, and where are you coming from, and what's informing you now in this 3D world. And when you leave this 3D world, if you think you can, from time to time, that could be meditation, could be drugs, could be a traumatic experience, a near-death experience, something like that, that has us be in a different consciousness than we normally operate in. So all of these aspects just kind of came up with how we use them to focus or not focus on things, how we go on automatic, or how we go on, let me apply this. And I think from a holistic perspective, we need all of the consciousness we can get. And, you know, certainly the yoga tradition are big on consciousness. You know, there's many schools of thought that say the universe is only consciousness. That's what it is. There is no there and stuff and anything else. It's just consciousness and awareness. So I think the topic, as you mentioned, definitely deserves a lot of deconstructing and reconstructing as we go through it over the next couple of weeks. And I'd be interested in seeing where we take it all. I just had a couple of other notes here just about our consciousness. I was going back to the paradigms that you were talking about. You know, certainly as we're born into belief systems, as you know, whether we understand them or not, or ever understand them, is something of life. But you know, some folks call it the drift, some folks call it the fog or the mitote, just as, you know, some people call it the box that we're born into. So as we look at what our levels of consciousness are, and how some we just have to work our way through and swim through, some we create, Some we're able to deconstruct and then, as I mentioned, reconstruct in a way that works for us, that fits whatever level of consciousness or context we operate it from. It could be a context of love. It could be a Christ consciousness. It could just be a consciousness of connection, where, I get that that's where we all are. So as we look at all of these things in our life, and as we pay attention and take the time to look at them, whether it's through meditation or concentration or discussion or reading or viewing, whatever it is, I think that's the process that we as human beings get to be in, is just in the question, what is our consciousness and what's driving it at this moment? Not necessarily to get to truth. I think it's really to be in the process of consciousness and then seeing what that consciousness has developed and manifested, and then iterating our next choice and our next action based on what that understanding that we just had might have been, without holding it necessarily as truth, however, allowing it to keep us in the question of consciousness and the awareness of consciousness. So that's my thoughts on that.
Wow, it's really important section that you've brought up there. Consciousness. I just touched on it, and I think I did create a whole section on consciousness, but I think you've just covered it pretty well there. Yeah, there's so much more to that. So, and one of my big things is what really bothers me is like I was having a discussion with some guy, and he got really upset with me that I expanded the concept of what consciousness is, that it's a universal quality, and we have this ability to access consciousness and so on, and all living beings, even trees and ants and insects and microorganisms, are all living consciousnesses. But to what extent they're conscious? Well, they're aware of their environment and they respond to it in some way, and that requires a certain amount of consciousness to me. And I mean, an ant doesn't just blindly run up to a wall and hit into a wall because it's programmed to go in a direction. It makes decisions. It's like, oh, there's danger, and it senses with its feelers. It's conscious. It's like, okay, there's something big and dangerous in the way, so I'm going to run this way, So to me, consciousness is all around us. And like I say, I talk to the trees and I do things that people might consider crazy, but it's just like when you open and you focus in on that consciousness that's all around you, it's absolutely incredible what you will receive if you're just open to it and you're focused on it. It's like tuning in with the radio, it's like, hello, how are you today? And you just need to tune in. And when you tune in, it's amazing what you receive. So if you're focused and your tent is right on that conscious, whatever form of consciousness or whatever knowingness that you wish to receive, it just downloads to you. And it's absolutely incredible. So to me, we live in a conscious universe, and we can access literally that conscious concept of the spooky action at a distance. It's like there is a timelessness of that consciousness. You can receive it instantaneously, like full download, bam, you understand, you comprehend. But then, of course, putting it in language is where we have to reduce it down. Very much about our reality, which is an incredible thing, is that we are taught by all of these gurus that it's infinite possibilities, and it's like, we're infinite beings, and that's so, in terms of consciousness and our ability to access that infinite knowledge and wisdom, absolutely. But in our ability to enact it here in terms of our language and the limitations of our physical body and the limit. We're limited in so many ways, and the society in which we live and the behaviors that are acceptable behaviors, it's just like limitation. And let's try and push the edges of those limits, but it's untrue what they say, that it's like this infinite possibilities, that you can do anything you please. No, you can't just jump off a building and fly, because it's not going to happen. You're going to fall and you're going to die. So use of language and telling the truth requires that we work within those very real living limitations that we have to live in, and thought is one of those. It's like we have this incredible amount of information, it's just funneling into us, but then we, like a bottle, we have all this information coming into if we chop off the end of the bottle, all of this information coming in, but only very little can go through the neck of the bottle into our brains, and then very little of that remains in our first of all, our short-term memory, and then very little of it eventually gets into our long-term memory. And so it really is this whole process of reduction and slowing down. And it's the same thing with information coming in through our synapses. We can perceive light, which is traveling at the speed of light. I mean, that's incredible. But what we actually get into our brain and the patterns and the interpretation, and it's slowed down through the electrical signals in our synapses, the chemicals that are happening within those synapses first, then, or between the synapses. And so it's just like gearing down, slowing down, reducing, slowing, so that we can eventually function and communicate at this level. It's like...
I have a thought on that, Dennis, if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
So not my phrase, but I learned many years ago that the material world is the ultimate guru, right? So whatever we can imagine and dream, it still has to be able to manifest in the material world, right? And certainly I agree with the bottlenecking and the processing and going through senses and everything else. We have so many filters between us and reality or actuality or whatever it might be. However, this is the reality that we're in as far as we know. The gurus, Indian philosophy, and certainly going through yoga, a lot of what yoga is about is being able to suspend the influence of or rise above the influence of the material world, specifically our body. So the poses are not to be able to be the best contortionists. They're ways of allowing you then, when you are in meditation or whatever, to not have pains and body and things affect you. Kind of, and you've seen this certainly. I remember one of the most telling pictures, referring back to the Vietnam War, was a Vietnamese monk dousing himself with gasoline and immolating, without moving. Just he's on fire and he's not moving. And not that I certainly wasn't a compelling image of protest, but it was also such a compelling awareness that this is what's possible, and you guys are over here shooting and napalming people. So as we get into these thought journeys, which is a big part of what we are doing here, the ability to imagine, to envision, to extrapolate, to connect to the universal consciousness that we are, it's an indicator that there's more to us than what the physical world is. So we're fortunate and also cursed to have that little window that you go, oh, here you go. Oh. So when we get that, whatever we dream of, currently it's limited by our ability to interact with our 3D world. I'm sure millions of years ago, or however long mankind saw a bird and said, gee, that'd be fun to do, fly. We've manipulated the 3D world enough so that we can experience flying. We're not doing it ourselves, right, yet, where it's not just our body, we need apparatus in order to make it happen. So I think as we approach our ability to make our dreams and our visions come into the material world, we find a lot of things that take us away from being able to connect just mentally and consciously. And so we try to manipulate the 3D world to get access to the non-3D world. And I think that's where that bottleneck happens. It's not necessarily that we need to fly, you know, in the 3D world to experience it. I've experienced flying in many, many of my dreams. And, you know, I don't know that it's anything. Would I like to do it in the 3D world? Yeah. Can I do it in my dream world? Absolutely. And the experience of it is as exhilarating and real to me as if I was flying off a mountain with a wingsuit. I'm sure there's a difference. So I just wanted to work on that thought about, you know, our bottleneck as human beings and thought beings, because you know, and all of us on this call know that we've experienced people that just have this intellect or skills, or, you know, we've seen it, whether it be musicians or, you know, or theorists, physicists, or, you know, artists and things, and just where do they come with that? Where did that ability come from? And I submit that it's the ability to connect to that universal unconsciousness or consciousness, that's what's called universal consciousness, that allows for some of these skills and visions and thoughts to come through and manifest on some level in communication, whether it be through art or physics or words or, you know, whatever, music, whatever it might be. Sometimes, as you know, it's just people being able to heal other people just by touch or, you know, sending thought. So as we're starting in this generation, at least as far as I can tell, more to look at what are these other methods of manifesting in this world, other than playing with material things, but actually bringing the unconscious in and allowing that to take its form. I think we'll see less and less of this material bound world and more of this ascension that you know, people are talking about. Ascension doesn't necessarily mean that the world is ending, you know. It can mean that the world is awareing, the world is consciousing, and that's what we're experiencing. And so as the 3D world suddenly is no longer important, that's when this ascension, I guess, will happen. So didn't know where that was going to end, but I just wanted to connect with the material world and the unconscious world, or the conscious world, the conscious universe, and say that, yeah, we can access those. Be careful about trying to do it in the 3D world. However, the conscious world is a whole other place, as you and I are finding out that anything is possible. And I think that's where the gurus and the mystics and the positive thinkers and all of the new stuff that's been coming out the past 30, 40, 50 years. I think that's the direction and the context or the paradigm that they're looking to express. That's it.
Hello?
Okay. Hi, Lorna, you can go ahead.
Hey. Well, definitely it's a huge topic. So I'm going to go to the other extreme to narrow down. And I have two words. One is the love and fear. And I think, especially right now in what's going on in the world, we're dealing with a thought and a feeling, right? And I know some of the things I know for sure is that love always works better than fear. I also know that in order to get to that state, you know, we have to go, I'll speak for myself, go through some fears so I can get to that state of love, and therefore my thoughts will be better off. So that takes me to talk about contrast. You know, when I find myself in situations that are not what I want, if I operate from fear, it doesn't work for me. You know, it hurts me, and it's very hard to go back to where I really want to be, a state of peace and content, to be content. I'm not striving more for the word happy. I have recently choose to be content because I think it's more of a safe place to be, because the other two are at the extremes. So I just think that the mind is a powerful thing, but it has to be, in my case, driven by my heart. I'm a better place to have a better day, if I let my heart to lead any given situation, especially the ones that are not that pleasant. And when I do that, things just starting to come to the surface that I haven't even discovered yet, even though the age I'm now. I haven't meditated for so long, like maybe the early 20s, early 90s, I'm sorry, early 90s. And I got a mantra, just taking a little bit of the word that Kurt said. In meditation, I received my mantra, right? And I got initialized and all that. And I always thought that mantra for all these years, up until like recently, it did work, right? The mantra was a magical word, in that context of TM, right? That will make happen that I could put my mind quiet so I can be relaxed and so forth. And it's not until, like say, recently that I find out that that word, it was just to distract my mind. So to distract my mind, because since I don't understand the word, the meaning of the word per se, like it would be in Swahili. I don't know Swahili, for instance, right? So it could be any word that doesn't have no meaning, that when the thoughts come, as I quiet my mind, it would just do the trick. So I got to that point because now I'm allowing myself to, using a lot the law of no resistance, and this is coming to the surface. As I was taking a shower this morning, another big aha came out that is so old, so old. I think because I am more consciously, of course, still making a muscle, but still more aware, more consciously of loving myself. That's what I mentioned, two words, which are coming from love or coming from fear. And yesterday I was listening to something that clicking, new things are clicking with me now. For instance, when there is a contrast, contrast being a lot of alive for me right now, that word contrast. Somebody tells me, okay, if I want to do something that it seems to be very risky, right? They were talking about how kids behave and they are able to be so free spirit and no fear. That was the concept. And then for a practical example, if somebody tells me something's going to be risky for me, right? Knowing that my spirit is risky and has been for forever, then I choose adventure. This is new, very new, very new. Choose adventure. And it's not that I'm being oblivious on how to be cautious, right? Because it's got to be realistic. But by choosing, by nature, it's a nature being adventurous instead of thinking that is risky, or somebody's telling me, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. I actually loving myself because, that's in my nature. And all I have to do is to love myself without being, I never have been narcissist. And that's not what I'm striving for here. But yes, love myself. So I think my mind is becoming less fearful, less fearful or less threat of a threat by focusing, right? Because I have not been that focused in the past. I wake up and I say, I choose my words very delicately, very specifically, what I'm going to do from when I wake up. And some days I'm able to do it, more successfully than others, but it boils down to love myself. And then the whole apparatus outside, yes, I want to say this. I know I stumble a little when I talk, but I know what I'm saying. I hope you can get it the way I intend. I think everything, I wrote this down. I think everything has its own gift, right? Everything has its goodness in it, but it depends how we use it. So it could be something really, really bad out there, but how I'm going to use it for myself. And if I able to do that, which is a mission, right, then I have better chance to pass it on into others. I hope this makes sense. So far, it makes sense for me, and that's all I have to offer today.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, basically, everything we are about is looking at the paradigm that we've been so indoctrinated into is basically a paradigm based on fear and destruction and all sorts of manipulation to create a love-based paradigm where everything we create is about love and life and nurturing and growing and creating this wonderful future. But of course, you personally have to be confident enough in yourself and love and believe in yourself enough to be willing to go out there and chase that love, chase that all of the good ways of doing things, instead of using technology to destroy nature. Let's use technology to grow nature and to create a wonderful world. But we have got to be willing to take that on as our personal mission to create that love-based future that we want. So yes, at the basis of that is loving yourself, because if you don't love yourself, how are you going to love everything else around you? So I absolutely 100% agree with you, Lorna. So that's pretty awesome stuff. Kurt, we are now like about 20 minutes past, so I don't know if you want to wait and let Brendan have a turn. Brendan, would you like to speak?
No, I have nothing to add this week. I just wanted to say one thing is that you guys bring up some amazing concepts and I appreciate it. You gave a lot of food for thought in order for me to think about. But yeah, other than that, I don't have anything else to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Cool. Actually, just Brendan, on that expression of your experience, that's exactly what helps save our world, is looking to create in the conversation out in the world, is for people to say, hey, there were some good thoughts there and I don't have anything to add, but I took in a lot today. So thanks for being that player in this particular activity that we're in, because unless people have that experience, then we're just talking amongst ourselves, and that doesn't change much of the world except the vibration that we are, and hopefully that will be enough. But having new people get something out of the conversation is valuable. So thanks for sharing that, Brendan.
And that goes for me too. I'm like so appreciative that you've shown appreciation, which is like, that is everything that fuels my fire, so it's wonderful.
I was going to say, this made my Mother's Day.
That's wonderful. For me, this is like such an important section, because really when it comes down to it, it's all about what goes on in our minds and our connection to the universe and our connection to one another, and our language. This is where it happens ultimately, because that is what determines what we do, and what we do then creates our world. So thought is so important. All right, Lorna, have a wonderful day. I'm going
Bye.
to end the meeting. Cheers,
Have
Brennan.
a great day,
Take it
Lorna.
easy. Okay,
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye, guys.